Not to read books. Because everybody reads books. But yet, society is deteriorating more every day. Everybody reads books. The brother called the other day on the radio and said that he asked about corn, right? Corn? He read books. He said that the text, the Kemetic text showed him that corn is good. Well, he better examine his text, because corn was made by man. To New Orleans, I became a merchant seaman. I was 20 years of age. As a merchant seaman, I became an engineer 5 years later. I'm a steam engineer. Don't ask me how I did that, because that's going to baffle you, because I've never been to school, and I don't read books. I don't read books now, nobody's book. I'm not even going to read my own. Because all the book readers come to me asking me, how did you cure AIDS? Well, that's like asking the gorilla, hey man, how come you keep yourself healthy without a hospital? How come you don't have any medicines? I listen. I listen. But to listen, you can't have a philosophy in your head. If you have a philosophy in your head, you cannot listen to anyone. I was there. I was a Seventh-day Adventist. I listened to no one but those things that came from the church. Well, if I were to listen to the church today, the Seventh-day Adventists, I'll be eating tofu. I'll be sick. You see? I'll be eating tofu. If I had gone to school, I would have become a medical scientist. I wouldn't have been able to cure AIDS, because they do not. They don't cure AIDS. If I had listened to all of the philosophies of Europe, I would have never been able to find the answer to the cure of diseases. But today, I'm going to share with you the African wisdom, the African brain, the African genesis, the African resonance, something that was never taught to us in the schools. Well, why should we expect the school to teach us something that would enhance our growth and save our lives? Why should the school teach you that? When in history has there ever been examples to show? But no. You and I, our parents couldn't do better. They had to take us to the school because they wanted to save us, you know, protect us, because that's mother. Mother doesn't want child to suffer. So mother was shown that if child didn't go to school, and they'd be illiterate, and the society is made up where you must go to school if you want to buy a Mercedes. But in our society, school, what you mean by school? We don't have such animal. We build things. And those who've been to school can't even build the pyramids today. Not in Honduras, not to mention the pyramids in Mexico. They're 4 times the size of the pyramids in Egypt. Oh yes. I know Ben Joker didn't talk about that. But that's okay. Because he needs help like I need help. We all need help. So the school that we thought was going to be so equitable, so useful, had become a deterrent. Because those that have been to school doesn't cure anything. A $15,000 suit on, a $5,000 shoes, I have to have all kind of stuff on me. And then I qualify. Do you have a master's degree? Man, I didn't go to school. Oh, put him aside.
Has no basis in fact, and it's basically propaganda. And if you hear things enough times, you start to believe them. So at my age, I'm 54, my cup has been pretty full with all the things that they, public school taught me and the things the doctors taught me. I grew up in Livonia. This is, a hometown area for me. And either A, you play the game like everybody else, or you try to make a difference, because I find it amazing going through this 31-year career how many health professionals will do things to you that they don't do to their children? How many things that they'll do to you? They asked a lot of cancer doctors, would you take the treatment that you do? A secret survey. The majority said no. They asked the cardiologists, do you take vitamin E? Most of them said yes. Would you recommend it for your patients? They said no. I find this interesting. You ask the doctors, do you get all these shots that you're supposed to get? No. Now, if you want to be a gangster, Wall Street has openings. The Democrats and the Republicans are loaded with gangsters. The country's been taken over by gangsters.
I didn't want any money. I didn't want it then or now. Because it's not important in your life. It was never important in our lives. The Maya shows that. The Maya built pyramids. The Maya lived for millions of years in the jungles of Central America. No money. The Africans? How long did we live in Africa without money? Since creation. Now they tell us we need money to fight AIDS. Something is to change my life completely. First, it was a Mexican. The Mexican said to me, "You're dying." I said, "I know." "How do you know?" "Because I fell out going to the bathroom a Sunday afternoon, and I didn't reach the bathroom. I got up off the floor. Something must have happened between there and the bathroom." But I had gone to the neurologist, the endocrinologist, the GER practitioner in Russia, in England, in Germany, in France, United States. And they were people that knows what it is about. They had the great big books on medical science. But my asthma and my diabetes, my impotence was kicking. What happened to the books?
The better thing to talk about, however, is the relationship between profits and cancer in the United States. There was a study that was published, I believe it was in 1994. It was a 12-year program, 12-year study. They looked at adults who had developed cancer as an adult, not childhood cancer, but adult cancer, right? And this is the main types of cancer that we get here in the United States. They did a meta-analysis of these people all around the world who developed cancer as adults for 12 years and were treated with chemo. And they looked at the results. And they published the results in the Journal of Clinical Oncology. And the results? 97% of the time, chemotherapy does not work. 97% of the time, it doesn't work. So why is it still used? It's one reason and one reason only: money. If you go to a medical doctor, an MD, with a sinus infection, and that doctor prescribes an antibiotic, he gets no financial kickback. Now, if he prescribes 5,000, of that antibiotic in 1 month, the drug company that makes it might send him to Cancun for a conference, right? Mm-hmm. But he gets no direct remuneration. It's not with chemotherapeutic drugs, it's different. Chemotherapeutic drugs are the only classification of drugs that the prescribing doctor gets a direct cut of. So if your doctor prescribes chemotherapy for you, here's how it goes, more or less. The doctor buys it from the pharmaceutical company for $5,000, sells it to the patient for $12,000, insurance pays $9,000, and the doctor pockets the $4,000 difference. And there ought to be a law. The only reason chemotherapy is used is because doctors make money from it, period. It doesn't work 97% of the time. If Ford Motor Company made an automobile that exploded 97% of the time, would they still be in business? No. This is the tip of the iceberg of the control that the pharmaceutical industry has on us. Most people have no idea of this at all. Now, I wrote a book. It's called The MD Emperor Has No Clothes, right? In my book, I have a bulleted list of 10 questions that every cancer patient should ask their doctor. 10 questions. I've had patients kicked out, literally, kicked out of the oncologist's office because the doctor was PO'd that the patient was asking him these questions. And these are just common sense questions. Cancer treatment in the United States, we have lost the war on cancer. We have lost the war on cancer. Why? Because cancer is not a reductionistic phenomenon. Cancer is a holistic phenomenon. And when you try to bring a reductionistic methodology like drugs and surgery to bear on a holistic phenomenon, you will completely miss the boat each and every time. You cannot do it. Medical doctors are like colorblind art critics. They can see that that's a boat. They can see the black and white outline, but they're completely blind to all of the colors and textures that make up the substance of the thing. It's no difference with cancer. The reason that people get cancer in the United States and the reason that we have completely lousy outcomes is because medical doctors are driving the research bus. When women get together and do a 5K run for breast cancer, all of that money, do you think any of that money goes to nutritional research? Do you think any of that money goes to homeopathic research or acupuncture or traditional Chinese medicine or naturopathic research? No. All of it goes to drugs and surgery, which do not work. Now, why aren't those women running for selenium? If every girl in this country took 200 micrograms of selenium, in one generation we'd eliminate breast cancer by 82%. That's a big number. Why aren't we doing that? Because medicine in the United States is a for-profit industry, and most people are completely unaware of this, and most people bow down to the altar of MD-directed high-tech medicine at their own demise.
You talk about cancer tying it to holistic. Explain what you mean.
Well, there's a homeopathic doctor in India. His name is Ramakrishnan. All he uses is homeopathy. He doesn't do vitamins, he doesn't do nutrition, he doesn't do diet. He just does homeopathy. And he has 52, 65, 72, 80% success rates with all different types of cancer. Abram Hoffer, who was a medical doctor, bless his heart, he was a colleague of Linus Pauling, the vitamin C guru. Hoffer founded a type of medicine called orthomolecular medicine, which is kind of like naturopathic medicine, but it's the use of vitamins therapeutically. Hoffer and Pauling had remarkable results with cancer patients, right? Dr. Wallach, when he was working at the cancer clinic in Mexico, because the holistic therapeutics are outlawed in the United States, was having remarkable results with cancer. Nobody had developed a cure for cancer, but their therapeutics were much more effective than drugs and surgery and chemo. Much more effective, and clinically verified, and published. But it's not looked at, because medicine in the United States is a for-profit industry. In a perfect world, if by some genie in the bottle magic, we would all wake up tomorrow, and from tomorrow forward, there would be equal disbursement of money for medical research amongst all the professions. The chiropractors would get 50%, and the naturopaths or 20%, and the naturopaths would get 20%, the homeopaths would get 20%, the acupuncturists would get 20%, and the MDs would get 20%. In about 5 years, most MDs would be out of business.
Let's just talk for a moment about testing. What are your thoughts on someone going out and getting a quote-unquote AIDS test?
Really, when we say it's an AIDS test, that's a misnomer. It's not a test for AIDS at all. And surprisingly, something that it took me a long time to figure out, it's not even a test for HIV. The test is for antibodies that are supposed to be antibodies to HIV, but they're not. It's a test for non-specific antibodies that may or may not have anything to do with HIV.
A very heavily referenced review article on the validity of the HIV tests had more or less concluded that they had never been validated. At the time, I didn't quite realize that one of the implications in this article was that HIV itself had never properly been isolated. It was so difficult to isolate and obtain that was the reason why the HIV tests had never been validated, because to validate a diagnostic test according to the classical decent standards, you need to show that patients who test positive with your antibody kit have got the virus in them, and patients who don't test positive are free of the virus. Broadly, that would be how you would establish its validity. And that had never been done, because you can't find this virus in AIDS patients or in HIV positive patients.
HIV, first of all, nobody's ever found it in a human being. Think of it. The so-called HIV tests do not detect HIV in a person. They detect your antibodies that react to some proteins that are produced at Abbott Laboratory. They do not find HIV in the person. They find a person's functioning immune system that could react against HIV if it were there.
Millions of people take tests that are referred to as HIV tests. However, the idea that there is a laboratory test that can determine whether or not a person is infected with the virus is simply an illusion. The FDA has never approved a test kit that claims to be used for the purpose of diagnosing HIV infection.
It is always possible to determine whether someone's infected with HIV.
So you're able to just draw blood out of a person that you suspect is HIV positive and find HIV virus in their blood?
Yes, even if their HIV RNA is negative, meaning that they don't have any viruses floating in the blood, because the genetic material of the virus, when it's in the virus particle, is in the form of RNA. But even if someone doesn't have any viruses circulating in their blood, they still have cells infected with HIV. When the nucleic acid of the virus is actually in form of DNA and integrated into the host DNA inside the human cells. And by taking human white blood cells and looking for HIV DNA, we can determine whether the person is actually infected with the viral genetic material, even if they don't have any viruses floating around in the blood. Does that make sense?
The ultimate test that the establishment offers is what's called a co-culture technique, where you take a sample of the individual's blood cells, white blood cells. You cannot find HIV now in this sample. All you have are these blood cells. But then you culture these cells with some special cells that Robert Gallo generated some years ago. You have to throw in some powerful chemicals, phytohemagglutinin or IL-2, for example, to force these cells to do anything. The idea is to wake up the patient's cells to start producing RNA, and then this RNA will be coated in a protein, and possibly then there will be viral particles produced in the medium. These viral particles now will go infect the other cells that you added, and then you will amplify by a period of time the replication of these viral particles in the laboratory, what we call in vitro. Now, these particles did not exist in the patient, in the human being, the person that you got the sample from. You created them in the laboratory. And by creating these virus particles in the laboratory, people say they have isolated HIV from a human being. They have not done any such thing.
Nobody was looking at the blood of an AIDS patient and finding it crawling with some new organism and said, hey, this is this virus that we call HIV now.
Is there a test that can definitively tell you if you're infected with virus?
With the virus, sure.
What is that test?
Well, the test is to do the ELISA test, which really demonstrates, and in essence it's a surrogate also because it represents antibody production to the virus. But they have demonstrated the virus, they've had crystalline models of the virus. HIV exists.
I don't recommend people ever getting tested. The reason is, I don't know what the tests mean, and I think no one else knows what the tests mean. I've never seen any evidence that what these tests purport to show, they're actually showing, namely the presence of a virus, the presence of an exogenous virus. I really would like to see the electron microscopic data of this, and apparently there is none. There is none where you've done a rigorous isolation protocol.
The test is for antibodies that are supposed to be antibodies to HIV, but they're not. It's a test for non-specific antibodies that may or may not have anything to do with HIV. So it's not at all like we're being told, and it's really, when you think about it, if you're told that testing is responsible, it's a pretty irresponsible test to be taking.
Popped up in New York City in the homosexual community, now it pops up in Africa, and tens of millions of people have got it, and the pharmaceutical company is going crazy selling them drugs that they have to stay on for perpetuity. Billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars, you are guaranteed, because all these Africans have to take this medicine for the rest of their life. Give me a break.
The whole AIDS hoax has been about us getting to take the medication. There's no HIV that creates AIDS. They found that the HIV is a very innocuous, very benign so-called virus and doesn't cause anything. What does cause AIDS is drugs, the taking of medications. And what created the AIDS condition in the homosexual community that came what is known as GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency, were these poppers, amyl nitrate and butyl nitrate, these things that were used for the heart to dilate the muscles. Well, the homosexual community, the one who created it into these little popping things, when you broke the seal, it made a pop, so they call them poppers. It was the inhalation of these things that began to bring down the so-called immune system of the homosexuals, and they began to have this immunodeficiency based upon overuse of this. Why did they use these poppers? Because when they used these poppers and they inhaled it, not only did they get the rush, but the anus began to dilate and relax. So the homosexuals were using this left and right. Thousands are being sold here in New York. And when they found that, they did not put in that poppers were the ones, and that drugs and these poisonous medications were creating the conditions called AIDS. They took the opportunity to ride the HIV-AIDS connection because they knew the money that would be made and that they could recruit people into believing that a heinous disease had attacked everybody. And where did it come from? Africa.
We would make posters showing a black granny midwife in a very poor home delivering a baby and saying, would you want this kind of person to deliver your baby?
It was sort of a cultural shift where midwives were portrayed as a vestige of the old country. They were dirty, they were ignorant, they were illiterate. And so hospitals were offered as this gleaming, wonderful place where you could go and have a baby that would be cleaner and safer. The reality, of course, was that giving birth with an obstetrician at that time was much more dangerous than giving birth with a midwife because doctors were graduating from medical school. Many of them had not witnessed a live birth before they set out to practice.
What happened was the OBGYN specialty hospitals started to sprout up, and those professionals started to multiply, and they needed a job. You know, business took over. All of a sudden, the concept of normal changed.
The whole thing is like a big snowball effect.
In the hospital, you're not allowed to have very long labors. So if you're not dilating rapidly, which you're likely not to do if you get an epidural early in labor, you will be given Pitocin. They'll put the Pitocin in the IV. It will flow into your veins. Pitocin makes contractions longer and stronger and closer together. So then the pain of labor is much worse. So you go with that for a while because you have the epidural, but eventually the pain of the contractions is overwhelming the epidural. You need to up the epidural, and then labor slows down more because of that, so then you need more Pitocin. Now you're not feeling the pain of the extra Pitocin because you've got the epidural, but your baby is getting compressed blood and oxygen supply because Pitocin contractions last so long and are so strong, the blood and oxygen flow to the baby is compromised. So then the baby's likely to go into distress, and then you're sent off for an emergency cesarean from a baby in distress from contractions induced by the Pitocin, which was necessitated by the epidural.
Step by step, one intervention leads to a series of interventions. And the net result is the mother finally ends up with a cesarean, and everybody says, thank God we were able to do all those interventions to save your baby. The fact of the matter is, if they didn't start the cascade of interventions, none of that would have been necessary.
There is clearly an association with induction of labor and cesarean delivery.
People don't have the information. When you look at obstetrics in general, there's been a series of very intense interventions that physicians have been doing day in and day out to millions of women, and there's not a medically justified reason for doing those things. Even common sense. I mean, the idea of lying down with your legs up being the most comfortable or logical position to give birth, you know.
The more you can move through your labor and the more you can move through contractions, they don't seem as intense. To lay still, it's like, who would want to do this? It's like, I just want to get out off this bed and move my hips.
The lithotomy position is the most physiologically dysfunctional position ever invented for birth because putting the mother flat on her back literally makes the pelvis smaller, makes it much more difficult for the woman to use her stomach muscles to push, and therefore makes it much more likely that an episiotomy will be cut or forceps will be used or the vacuum extractor will be used.
Eu tô aqui, no momento que o neném está saindo, ele não consegue, dificilmente, é praticamente impossível ele sair sozinho nessa posição.
When the baby goes in the womb, she starts to birth like this, and then go like this. But when he finds a little spot here in the spine, then he needs to do like this. And that means that the mother probably is going to shake the pelvic, and that means that the baby is moving. And then he goes a little bit more, and then he needs to do it again.
Para mim, eu não vou nem sentar porque eu tô com o joelho ruim. É mais ou menos nesse banquinho aqui que eu vou ficar sentado. Porque cócoras, ela tá aqui assim. A mesa de cócoras, aqui, ó. Tá aqui, ó. Desculpa. A cadeira de cócoras é essa aqui, ó. Lá no momento que ela está tendo a contração, ela está agachada. Então a mãe está mais ativa, né? Então isso é muito importante. A mãe está o tempo todo participando. No parto deitado, não, ela está deitada ali. E o médico está orientando.
System. Oh, she was 2 to 390. Excellent. On Pitocin.
This is Pitocin, which is the medication given through the IV that causes contractions.
Room 2, induction is doing fine. Just check that she's on PIT.
How much Demerol were you going to give?
Room 3, being induced.
Give the equivalent of Stadol. Just make sure we're going up on the PIT.
Just make sure that she's on PIT and something's happening with her induction.
PIT her means to basically instructing the nurse to start Pitocin.
I asked to keep upping the PIT.
Probably about 90% of our patients at some point are on some type of augmentation.
She's not anywhere near adequacy, so we just have to keep upping the PIT.
If you're not making that change in that segment of time that we're looking for, then we're going to try to facilitate things.
Maybe start PIT. So we need to up her Pitocin. PIT at 6:30.
Hospitals are businesses. They want those beds filled and emptied. They don't want women hanging around in the labor room.
baby.
Come on, baby. Good girl. It's warm. Yeah, I checked. It is warm. I was moving.
Oh. Oh.
That's really close, Lauren. That's great.
Today, what we have to rediscover is how easy a birth can be when we don't try to make things too complicated. When ideally there is nobody around but an experienced, motherly, and silent, low-profile midwife.
No.
Yeah, it's fine. Somebody else look at the time because I don't listen. Make sure she's above the water. Let me just see her face. Okay, good. I got it. Yep. You're done. She's fine. It's okay. Do whatever you need to do. I'm just going to keep an eye on her. Part of my job.
Be careful.
Cords a little short.
Yeah, a little short with
Yeah.
this side. Yeah.
Okay. No, sweetheart. No!
Another, yes. Good afternoon.
Is it necessary to circumcise the male child?
Again, sit down. The sister asked, is it necessary to circumcise the boy, the male child? Well, who started that? European. Who, my last little girl was born, I said, you're not, I told her mother, if this child is born and I'm not here, you will not cut the navel string, okay? You understand? Listen to me now, Fanny. You will not cut this baby navel string, okay? And I'm going to tell you how to do it. When the baby's born, you put the baby on your chest and let the baby suck your breast, the placenta is going to come right out. You put the placenta in a bowl and put some flowers on it, keep the navel string attached to the baby until the placenta. 4 days later, it falls off the baby, you throw away everything. No cutting, no stress. No, it isn't necessary to circumcise, because I was never circumcised.
Had a C-section. And after that C-section, which was a great C-section, emergency had to be done, came out of the hospital, and I said, she started to have some fevers and some headaches. I said, you were never like this before. What happened to you? She said, when I got out of that hospital, after that C-section, I walked out of that hospital with something I didn't have when I walked in. There's no such thing as minor surgery. So if you think things a minor operation, you're nuts. You're absolutely nuts. They cut inside of you and your system's suppressed. They hook you up to all that monkey business. You're not going to be the same. They don't got to cut into me. You're not cutting into me unless you have to. About 20 years ago, as this fear of germs continued to intensify, people started bringing me their babies whose skins were ruined since birth. People bring their kids in at 4. This kid's had eczema since he was born. How many people know these kids whose skin has been a train wreck since they were born? Unbeknownst to the doctors and the entire profession, if you want to see a kid get sick right out of the chute, there is an entire system of bacteria in the woman's reproductive tract that's a unique germ that you don't find anywhere else. When that kid comes through the vaginal tract, bacteria runs across that body faster than your eye can see. That bacteria protects the skin. So these kids, they're finding, have a ton of food allergies and a ton of skin problems if they missed. So your kid doesn't have a chance today because not only does a C-section miss that exposure of healthy germs, they've convinced every woman, if they don't fight, to get an antibiotic drip while they're delivering. They've sterilized the vaginal tract before the kid came out. These kids' skins are a mess from birth. That is the name right there, lactobacillus, and Prevotella is the germ that protects a newborn baby. So what I'd love to see a lot of women do, which I don't think you want to do, if you cultured that area of the body when you thought you were fresh and healthy, if I showed you what you could culture down there, you would not believe the bacteria that's always there. So watching them, everybody, kids come in, they're sick, they got colic, their skin's a mess. Did you get that IV before the kid was born? Yes. They sterilized the kid's bacteria through the placenta and start him on a road to disease before he's born. And they never fully recover because it says it's permanent. Now, if you're willing, now they want you to get a flu shot while you're pregnant with mercury while the baby's in your womb developing his brain. 4 years ago, it was against the law to vaccinate a pregnant woman because it would damage the fetus. They're making it today so your children don't have a chance. How many teachers do I have in this crowd that are 50 or above? What are the kids like? What are the kids like? If they can stack blocks together in 7th grade, they'll give them an honor roll thing. You get a bumper sticker on your car, you get a flag in front of your house. He can count to 20. This kid's a genius. He's just a genius. How many people know somebody that has an honor roll student? Raise your hands. Come on. Some of you are, I'll point at you if you don't raise your hands because I listened to him count. I've watched him do his ABCs and stuff. And I wanted to cry when he was doing it. The fact that he was 10 didn't really mean much, but. You know, this one lady, one of my 25-year patients that their families at all my lectures, she fell for this. She's gonna, if I used their first names, was it Peter or Sean? Peter? She brings in her kids, she does everything right. They're wonderful patients, they do all the right things. So she brings little, Peter's this big now. She brings Peter, and he looked like if you took a blowtorch and just kind of singed his skin. He's beet red. He looked horrible. So she brings me this wrinkled, beet red kid, and she said, "What do you think of my baby?" I said, "He looks horrible." I said, "He completely looks like a mess." And she, you know, a tear starts coming out of her eye. I said, "Did you take that antibiotic?" "Yes, they made me." I said, "His skin's completely scorched." So took a little, at home, she took a little bath, put all these germs in it. We rolled this kid around for a month in this bath off and on, fed some in his mouth, and his skin's perfect. We caught him as soon as he was born and before he turned into that eczema mess. Nobody understands this. And they will continue to do this tomorrow because they think the vaginal tract doesn't have bacteria. They live in la-la land.
Let me take you back to the athlete / couch potato. You talk about the athlete depleting a lot of the minerals. So is the reason that they don't live as long is because they don't replenish? And then on the other side, how does the couch potato that goes to the fridge and to the TV fare better?
Okay, so this is a very interesting thing to talk about, and this kind of gets us a little bit deeper into human anatomy and physiology. Okay, so the human body has the genetic potential to make it to be 120 years old. We have the genetic potential to make it be 120. And there are cultures around the world that live in the blue zone, right? The Vilcabambas in Peru and the Okinawans in Japan and the Bama people in southwest China and the Georgians in Russia. 1 out of 250 of their people make it to be over 100. And they're healthy. And they don't have hospitals, they don't have health care, they don't have insurance, they don't have prescription drugs. They're lucky if they have a roof over their head. And they're 100 years old, right? So there are some people that are getting close to the 120 potential. But my point is, the human body has the potential to make it to 120 years old. Now, if the human body is extremely resilient and can take a lot of punishment, right? So if you completely disregard your health, eat whatever you want to eat, drink whatever you want to drink, and do whatever you want to do with complete and total disregard for the rules of anatomy and biochemistry and physiology, the human body can make it to 60, 65, 70 years old. The average homeless person, you know, alcoholic, drug addicted, homeless person living on the street, the average age of death is 59. The average age of death of a medical doctor with a general family practice, 59. The average age of death of a Caucasian man in the United States, 78, and if you're a woman, 82, right? So my point is that the human body can take a lot of crap and still live. Now, the quality of your life isn't going to be that great, but you're still going to be alive, right? So this is why couch potatoes can make it, because there's a little bit of vitamins and a little bit of minerals and a little bit of amino acids and a little bit of essential fatty acids in Wonder Bread, right? And the crap that they're eating and drinking. So they put a little bit in, and because they're not exercising, they don't lose as much. So that's why that happens. But the corollary is also true. And, you know, we don't talk about this as much, I think, and I think that we should. But so if you live your life and do not pay attention to your nutrition, right, and exercise, you're going to accelerate nutrient loss and accelerate the genesis of chronic disease. But if you exercise and fill the tank up appropriately every day, Superman, Superwoman. We have an NBA, a bunch of people in professional sports. There's one guy, he's one of the oldest basketball players in the NBA. His name is Theo Ratliff. He plays for the LA Lakers. About 15 years ago, I think, and don't quote me on that, the dates might be wrong, but I think it was 15, maybe 12 years ago. He had bone spurs and osteoporosis, and he was told he was done, 22 years old. He followed our advice, called up Dr. Wallach, told Dr. Wallach what his problem was. Dr. Wallach told him what to eat, what not to eat, and what nutritional supplements to take. And from that day until now, he signed $125 million of contracts, sports contracts, right? Because he regrew his knees. He eliminated the osteoporosis. He made his body healthy by taking good recipe nutritional supplements every day. So, you know, if you want to be healthy, you have to supplement. And if you want to exercise, that stresses the body. And then your body tries to recover from that stress by, you know, fixing itself and regenerating new tissue. And what does it need to do that? It needs raw materials. So our athletes and people that are, you know, marathoners and Ironman runners and long-distance cyclists and, you know, weekend hockey players and stuff like that, they take a little bit extra because they need a little bit extra because they're stepping on the gas faster than you and I are.
omega-3 fatty acid deficiency when your kid's in the womb and you're a baby has a lot to do with how the plasticity of adulthood with your brain, how able are you to absorb new things? How well does your brain improve? Should I, Kelly? I had this was from last week. I was sitting in room 2 with the guy that's the CEO and president of a famous company. He knows that I'm nuts. We get along good. I can speak plainly to him. And he said to me in the room, do you think I should take fish oil? I said, I looked at him. It was the afternoon. I said, do I think you should take fish oil? I said, why would you want to take fish oil? He said, well, he said, you know, I've read some things about it. It sounds like something good that I should take. I said, well, I said, all your friends are on low-fat, low-cholesterol diets. I said, your brain's half fat and half cholesterol. I said, everybody's sucking the life out of their brain. Why would you want to take fish oil? He said, well, why wouldn't I? I said, well, if you took fish oil, I said, you realize they just talked all your children into putting mercury, aluminum, formaldehyde in their brain. We'd ruin all the kids, put them all in special ed. They'd all be ADD, ADHD, speech pathology. They'd be ruined, and they'd get a prize if they could stack blacks on top of each other. I said, they'd convince you that fluoride's good for your teeth, but there's not an ounce of fluoride in your body. In fact, it's just a waste product. And Harvard this week said the massive amount of fluoride you have been exposed to has absolutely tanked your IQ. I said, I would convince you that NAFTA, if you all voted for NAFTA, we'd send all your jobs overseas and it would be a good thing. I said, once all your jobs went overseas, you guys would go, this was a great idea. I said, we'd put Agent Orange all over your food. We'd stick Roundup. Nobody'd make a peep. We'd be watching the Kardashians. I said, Nick, I'm going to give you insurance that will cover every toxic poison chemical. And if you want to get well, you got to pay out of your own pocket. And you'd stand in line for this insurance. I said, why would you want to take fish oil? I said, I'd convince you that 2 planes took down 3 buildings. I'd convince you that fertilizer blew up this building 200 feet away. I said, I'd put Goldman Sachs in charge of the Treasury, bankrupt the entire country, and I said, then bonus the people that did it. And this guy's laughing so hard he's almost going to wet his pants. I said, if we kill enough people in the Middle East, we're going to be doing Jesus a favor, and one day he's going to say, hey, thanks for killing all these people. I said, last but not least, I'm going to have 2 people running for president. One rich white guy that I don't know where his money is at, and he's going to admit he's in a 14% tax bracket. I said, then I got the mystery man in the White House that the first thing he did as president was hide all his records. And nobody asked why. I said, you don't want to take fish oil. You'd figure out what was going on. I'm sorry.
If you take a drug to lower cholesterol, remember, cholesterol is produced for a certain reason. If you take a chemical to lower it, instead of restoring healthy thyroid function, which will also lower cholesterol, what happens? Memory problems, elevated blood sugar, type 2 diabetes. I mean, to think that a human being is one of the few animal species on the planet that cannot regulate their own functions? Is that insulting to anybody? Say yes. Yeah. It should be insulting. You guys are built by God. I mean, that's quality. Better than Ford. Okay, so this stuff to regulate your body functions with a chemical, it's a violation of law. It really is. This gal here, you're talking 68-year-old. She comes in here with scoliosis, obviously stress, but also high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugar. In my world, high blood pressure is adapting to toxic blood or stress. Okay, high blood pressure, it's toxic blood or stress. Okay, does that make sense? So I'm thinking low thyroid function, abnormal diet, nutrition, and everything else. Now she had to use a stair chair where she had to go from the first floor up to the second. And I said, hon, keep it. You know, that way your grandkids can play with it, but you won't need it. And sure enough, 90 days, she went down 14% in her scoliosis. Now her orthopedic surgeon said, yes, it did reduce, but it's really going to get worse afterwards. And she's going, what do you mean? It got better, but you're telling me it's going to get worse? Why? Because in his mind, what does an orthopedic surgeon give for pain?
Surgery.
Drugs, surgery. Okay, but the drugs, that's probably the safest, right? Okay. Ibuprofen, Aleve, Advil, those things inhibit proteoglycan production. They destroy building blocks of cartilage. They destroy the joints. So that's why he's never seen scoliosis recover, because he destroys it. Then we have iodine. Remember, T3 has 3 molecules of what? Iodine. What does T4 have? 4 molecules of iodine. So iodine's important. So you got to have it in your diet. And in fact, iodine deficiency is linked to breast cancer. Do we now know the link to breast cancer? Yes, because if you don't have a healthy functioning thyroid, your body can't regulate the metabolism the way it's supposed to, so it utilizes cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which weakens the immune system, which leads to hormonal-based cancers or environmental toxins. So, can you see the connection there? So now 40 years ago, they used to use iodine to raise up the yeast. They used it in bread manufacturing. Well, however, they found something cheaper and faster. It's called bromine. Okay? Okay. It's similar to iodine. You know, it's like human beings are like 99% monkey. We're similar to apes. Okay? I know. Similar doesn't cut it. Iodine is from a family called halides. It's the same thing with chlorine, fluorine, bromine. And in your thyroid, it's going to recognize this stuff and try and build thyroid molecules out of it. But it can't. It can't. So if your body it needs the iodine, but it doesn't have the iodine, it's going to grab anything similar. Does that make sense? So commercial produced breads, if they have bromine in it, are toxic, absolutely toxic. Fluoride was used as an anti-thyroid treatment. So if you had a hyperactive thyroid, they would give you fluoride. What community in this planet has fluoridated water? Well, Russia doesn't, China doesn't, most countries in Europe don't. Do they have rampant tooth decay? Nope. What are you giggling at? I know, it's stupid. I got it. Mass medication of the population with something that destroys the thyroid function without control of the dosage. Here's one of the main causes as well. The omega-6 to 3 ratio, it should be 1 to 1, 1 omega-3 to 1 omega-6. Vegetable oils, which is inundating in our culture. Has anyone ever taken a corn and squeezed it really hard and get the oil out? You can't do that. You got to add sulfur dioxide. You got to add all this chemical processes. You can't do it. Has anyone had a bag of sunflower seeds to get the oil out? You know what you got to do? You can't grind. You got to do a chemical process, and then you got to heat it up to over 500 degrees. So any oil that's liquid at room temperature is toxic, okay, unless it's olive oil. And that generally it's better if it's cold pressed. So we have our culture now that has all these health food bars with canola oil, with safflower oil, with seed oils, with cottonseed oil, all of these toxic oils that have a massive increase in polyunsaturated fatty acids. I've got an article in here in your handout that talks a lot by a brilliant guy, Dr. Ray Peat, on polyunsaturated fatty acids. They shouldn't be in our food system. They actually clump blood vessels together. It's poisonous for us. But they're in almost every packaged product. I mean, if people were eating this stuff, okay, instead of burning it in my car like I do, if you were actually consuming this, we'd have a population with 50% cancer. Oh, wait, never mind. We do.
You did very well. Diverticulitis. I get 20 of these a year. The men usually run straight to the emergency room. The men run to, you got to cool off the polyps. You got to get the bacteria under control, get the germ right. Usually it's 3 to 5 days. The stories that people go through with this. A lady from Florida, camera in her rectum, camera in her vagina, camera up her bladder, CAT scans, MRIs, complete disaster. This is a very, kind of private, 80-year-old woman. And it was a complete mess in Florida. This was a disaster. She got herself together, came up here. I had it fixed in 3 days. Her lawyer husband wrote a 5-page letter to the doctors in Florida about what complete incompetent nincompoops they actually were. You should see what happens when my patients go to Florida for the wintertime. You will be lucky to survive.
The wall, and this gal finds out that I know a bit about anatomy and physiology, and I start talking to her, and it's driving me crazy because here she is. She's got a can of Diet Coke. She has a genetically modified corn chip. She's dipping it into this dip that I know has got monosodium glutamate in it, and she's doing this, and she's asking me questions about cancer. She just had a mastectomy. And I'm going, wow, didn't anybody ever tell you what caused it? And she says, oh yeah, it runs in my family. How can you make it a half a century and all of a sudden genes are activated? Didn't anyone talk to you about genetic expression, how genes don't change, but genetic expression you do have control over? Didn't the oncologist tell you anything about neurotoxins or normal physiology? No. I mean, what happened? So I sit down there and I talk to her, and I actually enjoyed the birthday party finally. So turns out, now, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because this has everything to do with the thyroid. If you look at this, each organ system is dependent on the other system. So the thyroid is not an organ that needs to be looked at separately. In fact, that's beyond foolish. It's like thinking breast cancer is a problem in the breast. It's not. It's a problem with the immune system. You can't have a thyroid issue. So then I asked her, I said, well, let me get a little bit about your history. Are you taking any medications? Oh yeah, I've been on Synthroid forever. Okay, so that means, when did you start it? Okay, so this gal's like 55 right now. Okay, just had breast cancer. They started her on Synthroid, synthetic thyroid hormone, when she was 25. Now, first off, the things that are going to decrease thyroid function should be a red flag. We know that the thyroid produces mainly T3 and T4. Okay, we're just going to talk about those two. Okay, it uses a protein carrier called thyroid binding globulin that carries it to the cell. Estrogen can bind to that thyroid globulin, simulating a low-functioning thyroid. Okay, so what you're telling me, at 25, she might have been exposed to excess estrogens. Yes or yes? And thinking that she has an estrogen-based cancer, maybe this started a few years before, the doctors that were working on her detected it. But whatever the reason, she had a low-functioning thyroid. Could that low-functioning thyroid also have been a problem with the liver? Maybe there was excess fats, inappropriate sugars, inappropriate liver metabolism, because the liver is where 80% of that T4 is converted to T3. Or maybe she had a problem with the gastrointestinal tract, since 20% of the T4 is converted to the T3. Or maybe she had a problem with bile acid production, which actually breaks down some of the fats and helps produce cholesterol, which is where progesterone and a lot of the other hormones are produced. What do you think she had? I don't know. This is 25 years ago. What drives me crazy is that the doctors knew that she had a thyroid problem, and then they gave her synthetic thyroid. Here's the problem. They're not giving us synthetic thyroid. Has anyone in here ever heard of Synthroid? It's not a thyroid hormone. It's T4. Okay, now the thyroid produces T3 and T4. T4 is not really active. T3 is like 20 or 5 times more reactive. So when you're given thyroxine or Synthroid, the thyroid feels or senses that the production of the thyroid hormones are already up, so it shuts down production of T3. So by giving the hormone, you're already altering the function. Okay, so it's, you know, I mean, I'm okay with ignorance, okay, but this is just ridiculous. Then, 35, her gallbladder goes. Okay, so now what are the problems of the low thyroid that she had when she was 25? Excess estrogen exposure, possibly. Liver problem, possibly. Gastrointestinal problem, possibly. Okay. No matter what happened, we gave her a toxic synthetic hormone that's going to decrease thyroid function. All of those things are considered normal. Okay. Now she develops gallbladder issues. So what am I thinking? See, I'm not connecting the dots here. So it's got to be liver, gastrointestinal. Now she's got another liver problem. The gallbladder's not working right. So instead of saying, wow, you know, let's find out the liver problem, you know, you've been taking Synthroid for 10 years, now you got a gallbladder issue. Now the gallbladder stores and concentrates bile, so that means without the gallbladder, you can't absorb healthy fats and you can't produce, you know, a lot of hormones. So that means you're going to be at risk of, a greater risk of cancers, you're going to have a weakened immune system, and you're not going to have healthy fats. Without healthy fats, your brain doesn't function correctly. Okay? So they remove the gallbladder and they don't tell her anything about nutrition. So then 45 rolls around, she has fibroids and a hysterectomy. Anyone in here ever have relatives or friends that you see making incredibly poor life decisions? Raise your hands if you know somebody like that or knew someone like that. I've used this analogy a lot. It's like seeing somebody you love driving at 80 miles an hour into a block wall. Dude, you can brake, you can turn, you've got all of these options, okay? But they just keep going into the block wall until they, you know, date the drug addict with tattoos, okay? You know, and do you know what I mean? Okay, they do something really bad. 45-year-old fibroids. So now fibroids only occur in a body if you have excess toxic exposure, so I'm thinking more of the estrogens, you have decreased liver function, decreased pancreas function, and decreased adrenal function. So right now, I know the fibroids are there for a reason, but also more excess estrogens. So they remove the ovaries and uterus. They do what's called a hysterectomy. I have so many patients in here that have had hysterectomies, and I ask them a question, just one question, and universally I get this look like, why are you even asking that? So I get, you know, I say, oh, you had a hysterectomy? Okay, you're 55 years old. Why'd you have it? And it's almost like, well, heck, I wasn't using it anymore. No, there has to be a reason. You know, you've got these ovaries that are continually going to produce estrogens, progesterones. I mean, they have a function. So still, no doctor is looking at the normal physiology that the thyroid clued us in to the original problem. Okay, does that make sense? All the doctors are missing this. Then she develops breast cancer. Okay, and develops a mastectomy. So she's had multiple clues around her life to show that there's been problems with her metabolic responses. Okay, does that make sense? Now, what's that barbaric procedure where they flatten out the breast, okay, damaging tissue, and then they radiate it? The thing that takes 9 years to show a tumor, what's it called? Mammograms. Okay, good. What's the thing that's not recommended by most doctors anymore? That mammograms. Okay, yeah. Now, it takes 9 years to damage the breast. It takes 9 years for a mammogram to find the smallest tumor it can detect, which is about the size of a head of a pin. So that means that she had cancer for 9 years before they found it. Okay, and that's going on minimum. So they could have detected this years earlier. Years earlier, she could have been put on a healthy, nutritious diet. They could have told her about how metabolic responses, how the body works. So what I'm using is the canary in the coal mine. And so, I know this is a long explanation, but that was my brother-in-law's birthday party.
Autoimmune hepatitis. She's in the crowd with her parents. Autoimmune hepatitis. Autoimmune hepatitis. Every time I get one of these, the hepatitis B vaccine, liver enzymes 400 to 700, had the hepatitis vaccine, your body's not going to attack itself unless you did something to it. Her enzymes are doing good. She's going to have to watch this. That liver has been, her immune system's been altered. It's not the same. This is a 69-year-old nurse. She's been a great patient. The older nurses are great patients. What they've seen, they don't want to do it anymore. So she came in, 2/22/11. She said, I don't know how I got this. I have autoimmune hepatitis. Her liver enzymes are up. So I asked her questions. She said, I had a horrible reaction to the hepatitis B vaccine 17 years ago. This is how they get away with it. They're slow viruses. They're quiet. They're slow. They move slow. So by the time my friend's getting brain tumors, it's 30 years after the vaccination.
So estrogens and xenoestrogens. I have people come in here drinking out of things like this. Okay, now when this plastic bottle, I mean, God bless you, you know, I mean, water is a good thing. That's a good start. It's better than soda. But when they fill this, the plastic's still hot. Okay, and the water that goes in here is not regulated, okay, unless it crosses state lines. There's a great movie called Tapped. But if you fill this with water while it's still hot, you put the cap on it at the factory, then you let it sit in the truck, then it goes in there and it's refrigerated and somebody goes in there and grabs it and they drink it, okay, they're getting xenoestrogens. They're taking something that they thought was healthy into something that's toxic. Okay, so this is going to add to estrogens even though they think they're doing good.
One of the frustrating things about almost being in 32 years of practice in the year 2012, and this date right here is, what is that date right there? June 19th. Spending an entire lifetime killing things with your Purell soaps and your antibacterial and your chlorine and your antibiotics and your vaccinations and your swimming pools. They found out, which the chiropractors tried to tell you years ago, there's 10 germs helping to keep you alive for every 1 cell in your body. They found 10,000 different germ strains at all times going on inside your body. They thought you had 22,000 human genes, 22,000. When they add the different germs, that total went to 8 million. You had more germs protecting your system than you've had genes in your system. So to watch the people who've sterilized their children, and they live in a bubble, they got inhalers, they got nebulizers, they've had all their shots. Then I watch the dirty kids come in. They've always been healthier than your clean kids. And you have made a mess of your children. They had to get rid of the Purell in a number of hospitals because the germs that grew on your hand were worse than the ones you washed off. And these people come in, their hands, I have eczema. I got the little There has to be some nerdy people out there because that's who most of you are going to work for. So get used to the geeks and the nerds because they pretty much run the businesses. And they come in and they've washed their hands to death. And they come in, I have eczema on my hands. If they have eczema on their hands, I know I got a special hand washer. And mother has spanked them ferociously should they ever exit that bathroom without washing to their elbows and down. They've sterilized their hands. They're cracked, bleeding. They got funguses and yeast growing all over them. And they've been convinced that it's eczema. It's really a sad thing to watch.
It may be a major worry, but most kids' fever are no problem, says pediatrician Nancy Witham.
The fever is helping our bodies kill the infection that's making us sick.
Most frantic phone calls come from parents who want to know if a fever is too high. Truth is, doctors don't consider a temperature of fever until it tops 100.
Fevers in that 102 range that seems to be most of our winter cold and flu virus fevers. If your child is, say, a 4 or 5 year old, the fever itself is nothing to be alarmed about.
So when do you call or visit the doctor?
Anything above the 100, 3.5 to 104 range can be associated with more significant infections, although it doesn't have to be. So we want to know about fevers that high.
When the mercury rises, most moms reach for reinforcements.
We try to treat the fever as quickly as possible using Tylenol as our first-line medication. And then we just pay attention to other symptoms that she's having.
It's actually surprisingly better to potentially just let that fever be. There's good data to suggest that the fever actually helps our immune system fight off that infection.
While I went into court, the judge said, well, Dr. Sebi, will you please begin? Where do I begin? Begin where you say you cure AIDS, and the physicians say there's no cure. The physicians are 100% right. There is no cure for AIDS or any other disease. The judge said, just a minute. There's a contradiction here. The newspaper says that you cure AIDS. Then you agreeing with the physicians. That's a contradiction. No, it's not. When you're limited, it is. But when you leave out the box, it isn't. She said, help me. She said, of course. The physician take the position that there is no cure for AIDS or any other disease, and the physician are 100% right, according to their philosophy and their perspective. Their medicine didn't show them a cure. So how could they say that there is a cure? But the perspective that prepared me, there is cure for AIDS and every other disease. Oh my God, when I said that, the physician jumped up. Your Honor, Dr. Victor Herbert said, Your Honor, what other perspective could there be? After all, you know, this patent on us, the FDA has a patent on us. You cannot talk. The FDA talk, you shut up. Oh yeah? Well, I'm gonna find out. So, the judge said, what perspective is yours? Dr. Victor Herbert, Dr. Bonanno, and Dr. Christopher said, how could there be another? I said, there is another, Your Honor. And what is the other? The African bioelectric cell food. I've never heard of such a thing. That's what the physician said. He had never heard of the African bioelectric cell food. I said, of course. But we have to remind the good physician that You have not heard of a whole lot of other things. But that doesn't deny the existence of the African biomineral electric cell food. What is it? Okay. The allopathic claim that there are multiple diseases. The African biomineral balance negate that position. There's only one disease, never been two. The allopathic claim that to treat the multiple disease you must use a chemical, which is violating God. Right? The African biobalance said no. It's a nutritional approach, electric food. Your Honor, I told you that this man was insane and unscientific. He said there's only one disease, but there's only one. Remember, I'm the boy that didn't go to school. I'm going to break things down to the least common denominator. When I was a steam engineer, I found out that in a machine, thermodynamics I'm talking about, or an automobile, the only thing that could cause this machine to go bad is what? Short circuit, obstruction, overheating. The same thing with the human body. So what did I do? I put compounds together that would cleanse the human body of what? Of mucus. In so doing, AIDS, sickle cell, lupus, herpes, blindness. But it sounds too simple, right? Well, that's not my fault. They have complex things, and then they deal with the complexity. And boy, that's a job. Milk has calcium. Well, I stopped drinking milk 42 years ago. And I could fall on my knees. You drink milk with moringa, because they said to mix it with milk and some pages hair, you're not going to fall on your knees at 73. You're going to leave your knees down there. 11 times vitamin A that you find in carrots. Carrots has vitamin A. Carrots belongs on the acid side of life. So right there, and they said it to mix with carrot juice. Why would they do that? That's how simple we cure AIDS. We cure AIDS. We don't treat AIDS. This thing here says that Moringa said, and they keep repeating it, that they uses it when they believe that it's going to cure. They think, oh no, we got to stop talking like that. We cure. That's how we got to start talking. If you don't cure, get out of the way. Because you're lying to people.